So a few years ago, a game called Biomutant released, and this was on the Xbox and the PlayStation consoles at the time. And like a year later, it got ports to the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series. But now the game has made the jump to the Switch, and THQ Nordic reached out and asked if they could send over a code and sponsor a video for me to check out the Switch port. And at first I was looking at it, so, okay, well, Biomutant I had fun with when it came out. And then I looked to see who was porting it, and it was Saber Interactive, and they've done some pretty good ports, some pretty impressive ports, I'll say, for the Switch. So I am interested to check this one out, and that's actually what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you guys some of my thoughts on the port itself and actually revisit the game here a bit, because it actually has been a little while since I've played it. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So let's start with what exactly Biomutant is. It's an action-adventure RPG that was developed by Experiment 101 and published by THQ Nordic. And in this game, you explore this big open world with this tree essentially in the middle called the Tree of Life, and your job is to protect and basically save that tree, as there are roots going all over the world, but the world is covered in pollution and this weird oil that mutates things if you touch it, and the population from this world has now split off into a bunch of different tribes and factions, and your job is to try to bring everyone together, save all these different roots that then saves the Tree of Life. It starts out as a pretty straightforward story, but it does have twists and turns here and there to keep you engaged. But the thing that really caught my attention with this game when I had first started playing it was certainly the gameplay, but also the customization, as there is a ton here. But first, let's go over exactly how you'll be saving this world, which does include all kinds of different bits of combat and styles that you'll have: unarmed martial arts, dual wielding melee, ranged weapons, large blades, rifles. There's a lot of stuff to equip your character with, and for me, I mostly trended towards having dual wielding smaller weapons or blades, and then I would have like dual wielding pistols that eventually I had a boomerang that I would throw around and hit people with. But you tie together ranged and melee combos in battle, and you'll do some pretty impressive stuff. It has like like these words that come up above your character when you complete a combo, almost like a comic book looking style. You do also have dodge and parry, and there's magic involved here with different powers. I had like fire or poison being shown off in some of these clips, and they did include the use of gyro for aiming, which is a nice touch, as I know many people on the Switch are very used to using gyro, whether it is in handheld mode or when you're using a pro controller. While you can lock on to characters, there is this thing with combat that can feel kind of floaty at times, where you almost swing past or run past different enemies if there are a bunch of them that you're fighting against. But for the most part, the combat was pretty snappy, felt good, and eventually, as you get further in the game, you just become incredibly powerful. Now, the open world itself is very open. As soon as you get into it, it just allows you to sort of set out and explore at your own pace. You can basically make your own story for the most part. They do have specific areas that they mention you to go to push forward the main quest, but there's a lot to look into here. They have several factions and tribes around the map. You can decide to ally with them, or you can go against them, and most times there's a major reward, whether you do end up forming relationships with them or just take over their entire tribe. There are a lot of quests, though, that you'll find, side quests, that then also break off into multiple parts with full stories. And while you're traversing around, at first, it'll be a bit slower because you're basically just running around. You will gain all kinds of abilities and ways to get around, which does include mounts or even gliders. Just watch out for the occasional steep hill or rocks around mountains, as I would tend to really go off the beaten path and see if I could scale different areas. And they have predetermined marks where you can climb up very, very easily, but I would try to climb up like these little rocks up the side, and at times I would kind of slide all the way back down from it. So that can be a bit janky if you go too far off the beaten path, especially up the side of a mountain. Probably the highlight for me, though, with this entire game is the freedom that it gives you to create the character how you want. So you can essentially make the character to match up to how you want to play the game. You can be a tank who just rushes in with a massive blade and just swings and takes all kinds of hits, or you can be a character that gets beaten up pretty easily, but can also deal a ton of damage, whether it's with guns or you have psi abilities you can use. And as you level up, you'll get stat points, And while you're exploring the world, you'll find points to upgrade your powers, mutations, and passive abilities. So there is a lot to progress here with your character, again, depending on how you want to build them with sort of the world around you, or really your playstyle. Especially, like for me, I would go in and I would be more melee focused, but there were times where I would back out or dodge, end up just lighting up different enemies with my dual pistols or my boomerang. So I ended up focusing more and more on my speed for the character, so I could dodge around a lot easier, and then put a bunch of points, admittedly, into just being able to deal a bunch of damage with my weapons. And on top of all of this, there's a surprisingly deep crafting system, which when you're out in the world, you'll find all kinds of parts and different things you can scrap or that just work out right, and you use those to attach to your weapons or your armor, all kinds of equipment. And what's really interesting about this is you go into a menu to then see the different areas of that equipment. So for example, you may have a sword that you can edit the handle, or you can edit the blade itself, upgrade it, and do all kinds of things depending on, again, how you want to play the game. It certainly keeps you looking for stuff in the world to upgrade all these different parts of your character, and the crafting stuff can get a bit out there. You can do a lot of stuff in this game, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, so you may be out in the world, and you could find a helmet that is just a big duck head. I just find that it makes for a very unique experience each time you play the game, so each person out there who does check this out is probably going to have a completely different path through it. Now let's talk about what ends up being the elephant in the room for pretty much any Switch port, especially this far into its life, and that comes down to the graphics. Now, the graphics on the Xbox and the PlayStation versions, I did like. I thought the color palette was nice, and for the most part, barring some weird glitches here and there, the game itself looked pretty good. But of course, when you go to the Switch, a system that is now into its 8th year, you're going to be paring back some of the visuals in favor of frame rate and then also convenience with the handheld. And that's kind of how I look at it now, is most people currently are buying some of these ports to the Switch this far into its life because of convenience. So you'll notice textures, for example, being flat, the aliasing around the character models that simulate fur on other consoles do look a bit off here. You can play around with sharpening in the options to try to find a nice balance, but they do have the target resolution is a dynamic 1080p in docked mode and a dynamic 720p in handheld mode. The benefit here, though, with the pared back visuals, Saber decided to then target frame rate, which it coming in at 30 FPS in a larger open world for the Switch is about right. And for the most part, it sticks to that pretty well. There were some times where I would see the frame rate dip, specifically when you go into different areas of the map, and it maybe has to load a few things in the background, but otherwise it was pretty solid at that 30 FPS mark. I played primarily in handheld mode since that does set the Switch apart from the other consoles, and the 7-inch OLED display, it does work really well here with the color palette for this game, and because it is a smaller screen, it does cover up some of those deficiencies when it comes to textures, for example. There was one other thing that I did want to point out here. The load times, especially when you're first getting into the game, are fairly long and noticeable, but once they're done initially, you don't really deal with many other load screens unless you run into a checkpoint where they have to do a flashback or something, or you have to restart in the game. I've always been more in line with the idea of keep the frame rate solid as opposed to trying to squeeze out as much in terms of graphics with the Switch, so I don't mind this decision here really from Saber, and I do think it makes the experience better than trying to make the textures pop a bit more as opposed to aiming for that 30 FPS mark. Now, Biomutant is available on Xbox, PlayStation, PC platforms, as well, of course, as the Switch now, and the Switch version is coming in at $40. There's a physical copy for it, and the base game here does include the Mercenary Class loadout DLC. And I did have fun with the game back when it first came out on the PlayStation and the Xbox years ago, and I think for the most part, Saber did a good job here translating this game over to the handheld experience with the Switch. Even 8 years in for the console, it just keeps on going. But let me know what you guys think about Biomutant down below, whether it's a game you played years ago when it first came out, or if you're playing it for the first time now on the Switch. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.